Over 80% of all cardiac arrests that are arguably the world's leading killer, 9 million cases annually, cannot be treated with the defibrillators we have. 80% of cardiac arrest cases are non-shockable.
The vast majority of these cardiac arrest patients, there's nothing out there to help them survive, their leading killer.
Looking across various different studies, only around 4% survive a non-shockable cardiac arrest today. In TV shows, they show what we call a flat line. Those are exactly the types of cardiac arrest you cannot shock with a defibrillator in real life. In movies and TV shows, it's just a much better story and more captivating to depict a cardiac arrest case as one where you can defibrillate them.
So how big do you think this will be?
We could save the biggest number of lost life years since the introduction of antibiotics. It becomes a blockbuster product very quickly.
Hi, I'm Tom Guinness and welcome to the Raising Europe podcast. Here we go behind the scenes with the people building the future of European tech. Today we welcome Habib Frost to the show. Habib is the CEO and co-founder of Neurescue. Neurescue is a Copenhagen-based MedTech company that's developing a smart computer-controlled device that's designed to save lives during cardiac arrest by automatically redirecting blood flow back to the brain and heart. If you want to learn what it takes to build the next generation of medical technology, you don't want to miss this.
So Habib, it's great to have you on the show today. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm amazing. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So why don't we start off with a little bit about you? So why don't you tell us what you do and why is it important?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Habib Frost. I'm a physician from Denmark. I was lucky that I graduated as a medical doctor already when I was 23. I was the kind of kid who skipped a lot of grades, joined in on all the science competitions I could, always loved learning. And given that I graduated as young as I did, then I had this opportunity in terms of how much time I had ahead of me to try to see if I could solve the biggest problem I had seen in the clinic during my medical training. So I'm an entrepreneur as well as a medical doctor at heart. Then I'm Danish, born and raised, and we have an international team in the startup I have started. So I also consider myself somewhat of a global citizen. And for example, now here we're in Paris, which is lovely, and definitely a bit warmer weather than in Copenhagen.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
So where do you think the journey on your entrepreneurial journey began? Where do you think that started?
Yeah, in terms of when I was in medical school, I would sometimes feel maybe a little bit ashamed of how much I was interested in other disciplines as well. I would read books about how startups were made in Silicon Valley, the journey of, for example, Apple. I would read about new developments in engineering and thought, in addition to my medical training, why couldn't I just focus on that? Why did I also feel this draw towards all these other disciplines in terms of business and engineering? And whereas I saw with some of my fellow students that they seemed quite satisfied with that discipline and that amount of training that it took to become a doctor in itself, but I couldn't help myself from also being involved in these other disciplines. And then I found out over time that actually was quite suitable in terms of becoming an entrepreneur. So to answer your question of how I got started, it wasn't in any way an active plan in my head. It's kind of something that came together based on everything that led up to it.
That's amazing. And so how long have you been an entrepreneur and what have you managed to achieve so far?
Yeah, so I've been an entrepreneur since graduating medical school.
So from day one?
Yeah, definitely. And even towards the last semester, I did consider pausing to pursue entrepreneurship as soon as I had the concept of what I wanted to try to bring about. But the starting point was the reality that I was seeing, where I identified the unmet need that led to the founding of Neurescue, the company and the team I now lead.
Right. And so what was the aha moment or spark of inspiration that led you to launch Neurescue?
Yeah, actually, there's a few tropes that appeared here in this case. It was on a specific day in particular and on napkin drawing. On this specific day, I joined as an intern with the pre-hospital services in Copenhagen. That's quite competitive in terms of being able to, towards the end of your studies, join in with a physician team that go out in the field and treat patients in the most critical type of medical catastrophes, whether that is vehicle accident or cardiac arrest or respiratory arrest, all the kind of medical catastrophes that could warrant not only sending an ambulance out, but also a mobile ICU team out. And on one day in particular, we were called out to a young child, an infant of less than 1 year of age that had gotten a cardiac arrest. And despite having all imaginable tools in the toolkit and the most stellar team in terms of having specialist attending consultant physicians on that team and all approved devices and drugs at our disposal, we couldn't save this child in that case because it was a type of cardiac arrest that we call non-shockable, which means that the electrical shock we deliver with defibrillators were not possible to be provided in this case. So here we had that first event on this particular day. And as part of the training, it's important emotionally that you also learn to put that aside, because you don't know at whichever minute after that case, the next patient might need your full attention. And exactly as the colleagues in this case tried to instill in me, in less than half an hour from that case, we were called out to another cardiac arrest. This case, it was a young woman who had an early stage pregnancy that for various reasons had also led to a cardiac arrest. And in this separate instance from the first one, it was also the type of cardiac arrest that is known as non-shockable. And unfortunately, we were not able to save her either, due to those same circumstances coming together, that we had the most brilliant team members out very quickly to try to address this cardiac arrest imaginable, and every approved device or drug for emergency medicine, critical care imaginable, and couldn't save this individual either. And now it wasn't just a fluke. There was a pattern that started to emerge, that when you read a textbook, the numbers are one thing in terms of browsing over them or maybe being able to recite them in an exam. But now on this one day, just in this one day, we had 2 individuals with non-shockable cardiac arrest that we could not save. And at that point, I was 22 years old, given that, intellectually, I might have advanced a lot in terms of my interest and graduating early, but that's also a very formative part of one's life. And seeing that and being told for very good reasons that this is something you need to learn to put aside, I had to make a conscious decision of whether I wanted to put this aside per the traditions of our profession, or whether I actually wanted to hold on to it and try to see if I could do something about it. So after that second incident, I started to sketch out some drawings of potential concept for how not necessarily myself, because I was quite detached from the idea that I would pursue it, because I wasn't in training as a hardware engineer or as a pharmaceutical science major or anything like that. Those disciplines that actually are trained and qualified to make new treatments. But I couldn't stop myself from trying to see if there's anything at all I could do to contribute to helping these patients, even if it was just putting up meetings for other people to come together to try to address it. And that's when the flip when the flip was switched, in terms of going from having my full heart set on wanting to become a clinician,
Right.
which is an incredible calling, to then becoming an entrepreneur. And that's also how I see it around me, and with many great entrepreneurs, that a person is not necessarily educated or trained to become an entrepreneur. It's not classically an education in itself. One might study business and have a great starting point, or engineering and have a great starting point, but there are so many different backgrounds that entrepreneurs can come from. And in even the first few months of me doing this, I still didn't get that what I was doing at that moment was entrepreneurship. I was kind of just trying to bring people together to help address this unmet need. And then it's only after I had pitched for the first time to a venture capitalist that it occurred to me, well, actually now it's actually something quite different. And I put a label on it. But before that, in terms of deciding to pursue entrepreneurship, it's simply due to how enormous of an unmet need that I had, that I realized and got to feel in a very tangible way compared to the numbers in the book. And that is that over 80% of all cardiac arrests that are arguably the world's leading killer, around 9 million cases annually. Cancer, when you put all the different types of cancer together, exceeds cardiovascular disease as the leading killer. But we have so many of these cardiac arrests, and over 80% of them cannot be treated with the option many of us believe is the right one for all of them, which is the defibrillators we have hanging around, which are amazing treatments. The fact that we can bring back people from the brink of death at all is incredible. But what I realized there, and which has been an important part of our journey, is that it's only a minority of patients we can help at all. These 20% of the population that are so-called shockable, and that 80% of cardiac arrest cases are non-shockable, which means that we do not have any treatments specifically for this, except for continuing the chest compressions that have already been and are already being provided to these patients, and then hope for a spontaneous conversion from this so-called non-shockable state to a shockable state where they then can be defibrillated. So that was a big eye-opener that became a cornerstone for me to pursue entrepreneurship.
That's amazing. So you went from, one of the leading students in your class, reading everything in the textbook, then you get, hands-on experience, and you see actually the vast majority of these cardiac arrest patients, there's no cure for them. There's no hope. There's nothing out there to help them survive, their leading killer.
Yeah, unfortunately, they're up to the point of the endeavor that I have been fortunate to lead with some incredible people that have been, I wouldn't say no hope, but quite dismal hope. Looking across various different studies, only around 4% survive a non-shockable cardiac arrest today, which is quite different than compared to shockable cardiac arrest, where we see survival up to 50%. So when cardiac arrest is viewed as one condition generally, and when we talk about survival rates of, let's say, 1 out of 10, those all of those almost universally come from the shockable subgroup, and not from the 80% of all these cases that are non-shockable. So viewing them in this different way and trying to develop a new product or offering with looking at cardiac arrest as these two different subgroups have been instrumental in us being able to try to make something for this almost silent majority that don't get talked about that often. And there are some reasons for that we might also talk about.
Yeah, so you mentioned silent majority here. You know, when I think about cardiac arrest in media, in films, I think of people being rushed into the ER, you know, the defibrillators are whipped out and they're shocked back to life, or, you know, tragically not. But what you're saying is that the vast majority of cardiac arrest patients are non-shockable. Why aren't media saying more about this? And why is it the silent majority?
That's an incredible question. It has to do with the fact that in movies and TV shows, it's just a much better story and more captivating to depict a cardiac arrest case as one where you can defibrillate them. Defibrillation is an incredible treatment, and it's just much better storytelling to some degrees to show a defibrillation being performed and the patient responding to it.
Yeah.
And in TV shows particularly, they show what we call a flat line, where on the monitor you just see, as per the name, a flat line. Yeah. And those are exactly the types of cardiac arrest you cannot shock with a defibrillator in real life. And it's only very, very recently that popular media and only very, very few samples of popular media that have started to show that flat lines you cannot treat with a defibrillator. It's only when you see a shark teeth pattern, an electrical storm, that you can use a defibrillator, because a defibrillator resynchronizes electricity that's already there. Mm-hmm. So you cannot treat a problem that's not inherently electrical with electricity. So what we needed was, in a way, a mechanical defibrillator that would solve the key underlying issue we actually face in this situation, which is that we simply don't get enough blood circulating through the tissue of our heart and to our brain. Mm. When we give chest compressions today, we only replace around 1/3 of the output from the heart compared to a healthy beating heart. Mm. So when we only get so little of the needed blood flow to our vital organs, it becomes not even a coin toss, but throwing a dice, whether you're lucky enough that it's enough blood flow, that there is electrical activity for you to defibrillate, whereas the majority, we don't get enough blood circulating to these vital organs that matter the most in this temporary scenario, which is the heart tissue and the brain. The heart tissue to get the heart to respond with a heartbeat, and the brain to ensure that when these patients are brought back, that they don't have any brain damage from this catastrophic incident.
Right. So, and the flatlining, being brought back from flatlining is a myth.
Shocking flatlining is unfortunately a myth, and there are no accredited medical institutions or otherwise that would advise one to do so. If you try to shock on a flatline, not alone are you not providing any benefit, you're actually making things worse, since providing electrical shocks should occur when the heart is in a specific state where it's beneficial to it. But that level of the complexity, I'm happy to circle around, since it becomes very particular in terms of which state of the waveform of the ECG curve that are beneficial to shock on and which ones are not.
So clearly this is a massive problem.
Yeah, unfortunately.
How is Neurescue trying to change this?
Yeah.
And how does Neurescue as a product work?
Definitely. So we had to come up with something that could be performed in few minutes anywhere, geographically, whether a cardiac arrest were to happen outside on the street here, or in the ER, or bedside in any of the possible hospital departments, since around 45% of all cardiac arrests happen inside hospitals. It had to be an offering that was small and portable enough that it could be performed anywhere. It also had to be feasible to do under ongoing chest compression. So realistically, it couldn't be anything that involved the chest or even the head as well. So there were a number of constraints in terms of this blank canvas of trying to come up with something new where the legs were actually left, since they aren't used for any procedures and were not used for any procedures during a cardiac arrest. But the legs are actually the highway to almost all the life-saving cardiac procedures we have, since the largest blood vessels in the leg, called the femoral artery, are a highway that goes straight into the aorta, the biggest blood vessel in the body, just below the heart. So this incredible feature of our anatomy is exactly what we leverage by making the first medical device that could be used during a cardiac arrest without the requirement of any external imaging that would actually show you where you would end up with such a medical device. In this case, a thin catheter that is inserted into an opening the size of an ear piercing. So it's a robotic automated system the size of a large smartphone, and then a very thin catheter tube, a polymer tube that has a balloon at the end. And then you might ask, well, what is the balloon meant to do during a cardiac arrest? So the system can be used anywhere, since in this console we have sensors and automation that ensures that the balloon has ended up correctly in the biggest blood vessel in the body. Most times the operator, they use and it could be many different types of healthcare provider, they use the needle and insert this catheter through the opening and press a button, the inflate button, and then the system takes care of the rest and automatically inflates a balloon in the aorta to the right volume and pressure. This inflation of a balloon just below the heart concentrates this limited output from the heart. So that instead of having 1/3 of the output from the heart that goes everywhere, we instead concentrate it. So we have this 1/3 of the output that goes exactly to the 1/3 of the body that needed the most. So we supercharge this insufficient flow to the exact blood flow that these organs need, that the brain and the heart needs during this cardiac arrest, by very temporarily cutting off, so to say, the lower body half and redistributing the blood flow to the upper body half.
Okay. Wow. So it's essentially cutting off the bottom temporarily.
Yes.
To ensure that the heart and brain have more blood flow.
Yes.
Than, would have traditionally been given through classic chest compressions.
Exactly. And this temporary redistribution, even for a few minutes, kickstarts such a high level of blood flow to the brain and to the heart that they actually don't know that your body has actually come back. So giving a near 100% of the blood flow your brain needs and 100% of what your heart needs actually start the heart. It induces the heart to start beating fully and healthily again. So redistributing blood flow with our balloon just below the heart in the chest actually gets the heart to start beating again at levels that may even exceed what defibrillators can do in terms of electrically kickstarting a heart back. So it's a very, very minimally invasive solution that is automated and can be performed in a few minutes. We've seen it as quickly as in 2 minutes that a healthcare provider arrives and has performed this entire procedure. And then this redistribution by way of blood then kickstarts the heart back into beating again, which is a type of response to such an intervention that was only conceptualized and even at that point very sporadically, where my belief based on the science was that this could actually be the next defibrillator for those 80% of the patients that do not have a treatment offering already. And we've been very lucky that has turned out to be true. And here recently has received commercial regulatory market approval. So for the first time ever, a product, a medical product, has been granted the full market authorization to be used specifically for non-shockable cardiac arrest, which we got here in autumn last year with what is called a Class 3 CE mark, for those that are a bit familiar with how the medical device industry operates. So that's something we're immensely grateful for, and in many ways is the last step of a long journey from this beginning with experiencing these deaths of those patients back when I was a student. And in other ways, is the beginning, is the very first chapter of a journey, which is the actual business of bringing this out to all of these people who need this treatment to be provided.
Right. And when you think about how big this might be, you mentioned, it needed to be the size where it could be almost everywhere an emergency medical person needs to be. Is this going to replace your classic defibrillators, or is it going to be worked alongside?
The great thing with this procedure, this very large patient population, our technology, is that we are not competing with anything else. We enable synergistically all the existing treatments and products and services we have to be provided to many more patients. So defibrillators definitely aren't going anywhere and are amazing at those patients that they are eligible for. And standing next to that, the Neurescue device is incredible to help serve those patients that device is indicated for. Down the road, we have already been granted patents of a version, and we have built a functional prototype that has been proven in animal models of a small box that you strap on to the leg of a patient, or even another version uses adhesive. So you just peel away a sticker and you stick it onto the pants of a person or trousers. And then the device, like a printer, scans over and inserts the needle and can unfurl this catheter into the body of the patient itself. So we may combine the Neurescue device into a box that would then become the new defibrillator. The one box we have in office building, fitness centers, everywhere where you may already see a defibrillator that would then be replaced by this box that could both defibrillate as well as perform the Neurescue procedure in such a fully automated fashion that you don't even need to have any healthcare training whatsoever. So that's something we're very excited about, and I'm happy to share here with you that we are also working on the device for the rest of us that are not healthcare professionals. Healthcare professionals do fortunately attend the majority of these cases, but for rural areas and many scenarios where you have a volunteer layperson as the first one on the scene, we have succeeded in developing a version that they can use as well at the animal model validation stage, and are now working to take that functional prototype and develop it into a clinical stage version as well. But it comes out of the realization that as we start the market penetration or market creation of Neurescue for non-shockable cardiac arrest, as that time is being spent to have an offering ready for that remaining those remaining patients that cannot be met by healthcare providers within a reasonable time window already, to also try to help serve those people in the future.
Right. So the goal is to make it usable by non-medical professionals. Eventually, not quite there yet.
No.
So how big do you think this will be? And also, if you could give us a kind of indication on kind of the unit economics of the business,
yeah,
that would be amazing.
Absolutely. In terms of how big I think this can be, when both we and professors in cardiology and emergency medicine that we work with, how big it can be is actually that we could save the biggest number of lost life years since the introduction of antibiotics. Because we're talking about people who are in their 40s, in their 50s, in their 60s that have potentially decades ahead of them where these life years are lost. So in terms of the opportunity, this part of emergency medicine patients not having had a treatment opportunity at all, except continuing the chest compressions that are already being given to these patients at this moment in time, the opportunity is enormous. As far as the market opportunity, we're looking at potentially 1 million or more devices sold every year. This goes into the patient, so it has to be sterile every single time. But it also means the business model is quite simple in terms of every time a device is used, that's every time you have revenue from that individually sold product. That also makes things simpler versus the installation of, let's say, a robot and then selling disposables each time the system is used. Every time a Neurescue device box is opened, you have a device ready to go, sterile. Every time it's used, it has to be discarded since it's no longer sterile.
Right.
But in terms of the opportunity, looking at these 9 million cases we have right now, due to be 11 million annual cardiac arrest patients by 2030, and with an initial early penetration of, let's say, that even initial 1 million cases over a number of years, and looking at let's say putting a device price just for the purpose of this podcast, let's say €5,000 per kit that is able to do this incredible benefit to patients, it becomes a blockbuster product very quickly.
Right.
Which in the medical world is $1 billion or $1 billion or euro in revenue. That might also be the definition generally, but that's typically at the point where we say something is a blockbuster, at least in the biopharmaceutical industry. And I allow myself to borrow that term over for this medical device as well.
Amazing. And so the 9 million that you mentioned, is that globally or is that in specific regions?
That is globally. In the US, across both the cases in hospital and out of hospital, we see at least, just for the US alone, 650,000 cases annually. In Europe, we also see around 500,000 cases annually. So if you take these leading markets that are typically amongst the first for a new drug or medical device, even if we just start here, there is an incredible opportunity to help a lot of people.
That's amazing. So talking about starting with the device rollout,
Yes.
you're here in Paris.
Yes.
What are you doing here, and where do you see Neurescue going next?
Absolutely. So I'm in Paris. It's 24 degrees Celsius. We're in Denmark right at the moment. We have 9 degrees Celsius. So that's obviously wonderful to have that excuse, but it is a professional trip, except for this great conversation we're having now, where I'm actually here to activate the Paris emergency services on Neurescue. They are arguably the leading resuscitation team in the world, since for select patients, they even bring out heart-lung machines and place people on heart-lung machine in the field. They've done that at the Louvre. They've done it at metro stations. It's an incredible team. And we have consulted with and done usability studies with them during the development. So it was clear to us that given this full approval of our device, that they would be amongst the first where we would actually use it. And in the greater metropolitan area of Paris, you have more than 10 million people that they can reach within a 40-minute time frame, which is the one we have set as the cutoff to begin with, where they would be able to quickly, in less than 10 seconds, evaluate whether a patient is eligible for defibrillation or eligible for Neurescue. So now finally in that pathway, we have actions to take with an approved, validated product that can benefit if the patient is non-shockable. And the way we find that out is by putting on defibrillator pads, and then the device says so, or you can see that on the scope. In those cases, we have the scope by seeing whether it is a flatline or whether you have these shark teeth that we talked about. So the first trip I ever took after I came up with the napkin drawings for Neurescue was a medical conference in Paris. And that also becomes a full circle moment that now I'm here back again to actually hand over Neurescue devices for them to use on patients. So that's something the team and I are immensely grateful for.
That's amazing. And so when it comes to rollout, starting to roll out here in Paris, anywhere else you're starting to roll out?
Yeah, so we have also just had the first case where Neurescue has been used in Spain. In Spain, they have up-qualified general practitioners to emergency providers, which is also incredibly exciting that you take people that are originally trained as family doctors, and we have now seen that they have been able to use Neurescue in Germany. We have been able to provide it to cardiologists. Here in Paris, it's people with a background in anesthesiology, which is classically the specialty of life support, which is what happens during anesthesia as well. Emergency medicine providers, and there are many ways to becoming a pre-hospital physician. But to see across the mix of anesthesiologists, emergency medicine specialist, cardiologist, and even general practitioners having been able to use Neurescue is incredible. Our current thinking is to start focusing on Spain, Germany, and France, that also happen to be the largest economies in Europe. But we're open to early stage rollout amongst all the territories that fall under the jurisdiction of this CE mark approval we've gotten. we do need to, in each case, translate the IFU, the instructions, labeling, and some other things. So it's not just overnight when we go into a new specific country, but despite being a small team, we're open to start help people across Europe and the other markets that fall under this CE mark approval.
Right. So now you got the CE mark and deployment is kind of underway.
Yes.
How is the team? Like what is the team structure like at Neurescue?
Yeah.
And how do you see that evolving over the next few years?
Yeah. We are a very flat organization, very multidisciplinary. There are not two of us that have the same educational background. One of our team members, our COO, Bjørn Glavin, is a graduate from business school. I'm a medical doctor, and we have an excellent, incredibly experienced and skilled anesthesia and intensive care nurse. We have people with background in architecture that have made the industrial design of the device, engineers, obviously, as well, people that are graduated in pharmacy and have jumped over to the device industry. And yeah, there are, again, no two people of the 10 people we are now that have the same background. And now, having recently initiated a funding round for the coming chapter, we will start to look at hiring more commercial people for the commercial development and sales efforts that we will be initiating for that early commercial rollout of the device. That obviously will involve close collaboration with all the existing team members. I'm usually the one that are out there, so to say, selling the case, with point of departure in the science and the clinical side, and that will be combined with commercial savvy in terms of, one thing is to have the doctors, nurses, and paramedics say yes, but it's another one to have the purchasing department and the administrative side to also say yes, which requires some different skill sets than the one we have in the team already.
Definitely. The scaling up phase is very different to the starting up.
Yes.
So wishing you and the team all the best in the next stage. When it comes to investors who've backed you so far, who's backed Neurescue today, and where do you see fundraising going in the next 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We've been fortunate that a lot of leading life science executives from Denmark have invested into Neurescue, from companies such as Novo Nordisk, Ambu, a medical device company out of Denmark, ALK-Abello, allergy medicines company. So Copenhagen is an incredible life science hub, and there are a lot of these executives that, even when I was just a solo student that had newly registered a company, that started to support me, and could see that there were a lot of skills and contact and resources that I didn't have, and not only brought in their expertise and networks, but also their money as angels. So there's been a lot of incredible angels and mega angels and high net worth families. For example, the family behind the largest toy store chain in Scandinavia are one of our biggest investors. So we've also had high net worth individuals and family offices that have come in so far. And our most recent round was facilitated by some incredible investors out of the UK called Westhill Capital, based in London. So that was the most recent round. And looking ahead at our next chapter, we're looking to raise 10 million euros for that early commercial rollout and for those next step on our journey. So in terms of the expansion of the team, it will be more of a commercial focus. And in terms of the scope and the focus of our next round, it is to take that step from having gotten that approval and which opens up the opportunity to use this device on all of these cardiac arrest patients, and then becoming the organization that can also carry out that work in the right way. And that are some new people that we look forward to bringing on board.
Right. And on funding this next chapter, of that 10 million, how much of that is, you think, going to come from existing investors, and how much is going to come from new investors?
We're lucky that we have already gotten commitments for over half of the round already, with a mix of our existing investors as well as the Danish Sovereign Growth Fund. Not everyone is in such a lucky position, but there's still room for the right investors to join in. And hopefully, if they hear this message, that might be something that piques their interest.
Right. And aware that you've raised grant funding as well in the past. How was that? How was raising grants, and how did you use them?
Yeah. We've also been very fortunate to have raised a lot of non-dilutive grant funding, or soft funding, as some call it. We have, in 2 separate instances, raised a EU Horizon grant, which is this incredibly competitive instrument where you get, no strings attached cash for a technological development journey to advance something that is no longer science and bring it closer to no longer early stage basic research and bring it closer to a new commercial product, where we have been down to Brussels twice and won grants. Most recent one, 2.5 million euros, and the one before that was between 1.5 million and 2 million euros. So that's incredible. And also from the Danish government, we have been able to raise grants. So for deep tech, where the road to the first invoice can be that much longer, we have been fortunate to be in a time and a place where it has been possible for us to raise a lot of the cash for that part of the journey in a non-dilutive fashion. So, and I think that is a hallmark of Europe. The valuations may not match the ones you see in, let's say, the US, but the total amount of available early stage grant funding, I would say, is also correspondingly bigger. So there are benefits and slight drawbacks depending on where you're exactly located of the many great, life science hubs around the world.
So if you could summarize, you're very, very busy at Neurescue at the moment. Could you summarize what's going to happen in the next 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, certainly. So it will be to conclude this funding round, bring that together, then to do recruitments for this next commercial part of the journey on that end of the things. And then just as exciting, to continue the development of this next platform that over time will enable everyone to perform this life-saving procedure. And then it's to continue to strengthen our evidence with producing more and more clinical data that we can use as part of our value package to show to these hospital administrators and these payers that are responsible for things such as reimbursement of procedures, to help them bring the case all the way through, that not only is it a life-saving procedure, but the economic side of it also match. And fortunately, it's clear to see from the high-level overview that spending the few thousands of dollars the device cost in terms of potentially decades of life here, that math checks out. But it also has to be written out and scoped out and conducted in the right way. And those are the people we're going to bring aboard. So some R&D on a next separate platform for automated vessel puncture. It can be used not just for Neurescue, but many different types of life-saving procedures. Then continued clinical development, and then the initial commercialization of the device.
So aware this is a very serious topic, which you spend an awful lot of your time on. What do you like to do outside of building the business?
Yeah, I love spending time with my family and friends. When the opportunity presents, go out into nature. I've been to Canada with my friends. Definitely recommend it. Very, very beautiful. Going to Switzerland this summer. So trying to get a little bit of mud on the fingers and not just blood.
What films would you recommend to others?
Yeah, I love sci-fi. There's many times in sci-fi I've seen a device that has been put on someone and it saved their life. And I thought to myself, that must be possible to do in real life as well. There are also gemstones such as Silence of the Lambs that, let's say, many in a younger generation might not have seen, that I think is incredible. Not because I like the gore side of it, but just in terms of even in the most unlikely circumstances to find the courage to do something to help others. It's something that inspires me. But sci-fi, fantasy, stuff like that is definitely some favorites of mine.
So Habib, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great having you on the show and wishing you and Neurescue all the best in the future.
Thank you so much, Tom. It was a pleasure to spend some time with you.
I have a quick favor to ask you. Raising Europe is a community-supported channel. If you find that our content has been valuable to you or has helped you in any way, please hit the subscribe button. It's one quick, free, easy way for you to support the channel and help us make our production better each and every week. Thank you so much for joining us on our journey so far. Without you, none of this would be possible.